This is the Maruti Suzuki Jimny, a car that a lot of you will be familiar with, but not exactly how you're going to be familiar with it. Okay, thank you very much, Ame. I had to use the services of my boss to give you guys a better size reference of what the Jimny looks like, how big or small it is compared to a regular sized human, because obviously once I come into the frame, this poor thing's going to look like a scale model. So welcome everyone then to the review of the Maruti Suzuki Jimny 5-door, and I'm guessing that because we in India are the first market to get the 5-door version of the Jimny, a couple of our viewers are going to be joining us from overseas. So if you're from Australia, good day. If you're from South Africa, welcome to our channel, bro, and hope you subscribe as well. And in this video, we're going to get into the details of the car's size, its civilian sensibilities, and maybe even delve into its military prospects. But first, let's talk about the first thing that we brought up, its size. So here's the deal. If your mind is going to an off-roader and you're thinking Jeep Wrangler, Land Rover Defender, G-Wagon or Ford Bronco, you need to temper your expectations a fair bit, because even compared to something like the Mahindra Thar 3-door, this thing is about the same length, it's got a bigger wheelbase, but it is significantly down on width as well as height. So if you're someone who associates off-roaders as something that's got to have that bravado, has to be big and have massive road presence, that's not exactly something you're going to get with the Jimny. In fact, its wheels, it's running on 15-inch wheels draped in 195/80 section tires. In fact, if you drop the sidewall percentage by about 20%, that's the whereabouts of the size you get with B-segment hatchbacks. And I suspect it's because of these compact dimensions that Maruti Suzuki didn't see it fit to launch the Jimny 3-door in India, even though they do manufacture it right here, because with that off-road hardware and its capabilities and that 1.5 petrol engine, spoiler alert, that's for the engine it gets, it would land up becoming pricey. But because of its size, people may expect it to, or may have expected it to be priced on par with something like an Ignis. So while this may not offer the badassery of something like a Mahindra Thar 3-door, let alone the upcoming 5-door, functionally these compact dimensions do make sense on two important fronts. Number one, when you're going off-road and you're going to come up against narrow trails, challenges that are not exactly all that roomy, and you need to make very tight turns or U-turns even, on that front, having these compact dimensions will come in very handy, and you can give yourself a better shot of going through with a Saturday morning off-road session without necessarily increasing your risk of making the car look like it was scratched up by some giant cat. And two, these compact dimensions also make a lot of sense if you're looking at an everyday city car, because driving through our space-starved cities, filtering through traffic, parking this thing in a cramped parking spot, it all becomes so much easier. In fact, if you are looking to buy your son or daughter their first car, chances are they would want something that's interesting and quirky, which, let's face it, this thing is. But at the same time, you don't want them to have a car that is going to be a handful to handle, and you want to reduce their risk of bumping into random people, pedestrians, animals, cars, what have you. And with a compact dimension like this, it does make a lot of sense. In fact, in the hilly parts of India, like where we are in Dehradun, cars like the Eco, the Alto, the Wagon-R, the Espresso, they're all very popular for one very important reason, that they're compact, particularly when it comes to width. And this thing, I can hug the Jimny. That's how easily I can hug it, obviously because I'm a large person myself, but that's also because this thing is just about 1 inch wider than a Wagon-R. That's it. Just a quick note before we go any further. This right here on either side is where the rear tow bars are placed. They're not integrated into the bumper. Not all that inset, so relatively easy to reach, but if you're stuck in a deep water crossing or some slush, they can get a little bit tricky to reach. The duality of this is that the Jimny has all the design traits that you'd associate with a butch or macho off-roader, like the completely flat nose, the flared up wheel arches and chunky bumpers and body cladding, the old school round headlights with washers, by the way, boxy profile all around to the extent that someone as artistically impaired as me could draw this properly, and even bumper integrated tail lights. But because all of these elements are fixed to a car that is so compact, it becomes kind of cute. It's just coo. Let's talk about the boot space. And with this shift to a 5-door configuration, obviously there is an expectation that it's going to be more practical. But how much of that size increase has gone into accommodating more rear seat passenger space, and how much for more boot space? Well, first of all, This tailgate has got a bit of an identity crisis because it's trying to figure out if it wanted to be a powered tailgate or not. A lot of hydraulic assist obviously factored in because of the weight of the spare tire itself. Now on paper, the boot space number not all that impressive, but couple of medium-sized bags, you can get them in pretty easily width-wise as well. With larger bags, most likely you'll have to stack them vertically, and it'll obviously help if you have more than one because it'll sort of hold it steady in place, otherwise you'll have them rocking around all the time. So it's not a massive boot, but I would say that this is plenty practical still, and you can get about a weekend's worth of luggage in without too much of a struggle. Of course, if you want, you can fold these rear seats down, but then it's not like it's going to be completely seamlessly fitting into the boot floor. So you do have a notable bump over there, and it's going to hamper the practicality to some extent, but obviously you do have that option nonetheless. And as to why we have these rear seats buckled up even though nobody is sitting in them, well, that's an issue I'm going to address later on. It's kind of annoying. So what's the Jimny like on the inside? Well, first of all, when you step in, the most apparent thing that you're going to notice is how old school the layout of this dashboard is. Of course, because the 3-door has been revealed for a while, this dashboard layout may not look all that new to you, but it is still extremely charming. And you have a few quirks here and there. For example, these fake Allen bolts that have integrated around the center console, as well as these grab rails over here. But most importantly, the biggest element of charm for me comes from the instrument binnacle, because you have this almost gypsy-like display, almost identical to how it had in the Gypsy, including the amber lighting with these analog dials over here with an MID in the middle. You have a separate stalk over here on the left side for the trip, as well as this to look at the multi-information display. And in typical off-roader style, what you'll notice is that you do feel from behind the steering that you're very connected to the car, in that the dashboard itself is quite slim, so you do land up sitting quite close to the windshield. The door pads are also quite thin, and generally speaking, because the default seat height of the Jimny's driver's seat is quite high, it's not adjustable unfortunately. Even if you are shorter, say 5'4", 5'5", you can get a good idea and set a good judgment of the car's dimensions and where you have to place it, especially because the front end of the car is so sharply defined and you know exactly where the corners are. Now on the inside, what you will also notice is that same function first approach continues. So there's absolutely nothing in here in terms of plastic quality that will feel particularly premium, upmarket, or anything of that sort. It's going to be very functional. Yes, you do have a little bit of a soft touch element here on the passenger side grab rail, but again, that's not a premium touch. It's just for improving grip. It's made of resin, feels kind of like styrofoam. So it's not a major advantage over there. And even if you're talking about amenities, you have just the right amount. So no sunroof, no ventilated seats, none of that stuff. You've got 2 sun visors with independent vanity mirrors. You have manual adjustment for the IRVM. The steering is adjustable only for rake and not for reach, which is a major annoyance for someone who's as tall as me. Like I mentioned before, the driver's seat height is again not adjustable. You do have auto AC along with power windows both for the front and rear.
The 9-inch touchscreen supports both Android Auto and Apple CarPlay wirelessly and is generally easy to use. The interface is a bit cluttered, but you can get a hang of it quite easily, and no complaints on response times either. The 4-speaker music system, however, is strictly okay. With no tweeters, the soundstage is under you, not around you.
So what is a Jimny 5-door going to be like for tall users or heavy set users, or somebody who is both tall and heavy set? Well, let's say on that front, it is just usable enough, in that it is not particularly palatial in the kind of cabin space you're going to get. It doesn't feel all that roomy because obviously this car is very narrow on the outside, and you're going to feel it on the inside as well, to the extent that if at all by chance my indicators stop working, I can lower the window and give an indicator right here from the driver's seat. That's how narrow this cabin is. So yeah, if you're going to have larger people, you are going to sit relatively close. You won't have your shoulders touching, but yes, you will sense that there's not the greatest sense of space inside in the cabin. Then you will also find that if you are tall, your knee will land up fouling with the center console. The advantage here is that the floor box itself is relatively accommodating. So even for someone like me with size 15 feet, I am able to manage with both the automatic as well as the manual transmission. The disadvantage in the manual, of course, is because the floor box is not so wide, you don't really have any space besides the clutch pedal to rest your foot. So you will land up resting it either behind the clutch pedal or somewhere behind. And that can get a little bit awkward, especially over longer distances. So what is this back seat like? Well, the first thing that you need to be aware of is that it's not just a narrow car, it is also a rated 4-seater. This is not a 5-seater car, which means you only have 2 seat belts at the rear as well, and I get to the annoyance of those seat belts later on. And once you're trying to get into the cabin, the first thing you will pick up on is that the door, yes, it is a 5-door car, but the rear door itself is kind of narrow, the whole passageway to get in, so it is a little bit tricky, especially if you're larger in size. But once you're inside, you'll find that the space isn't actually half bad. For example, I'm seated behind my own driving position. No, there's no way in hell that I can sit behind my own driving position. This seat is set to the height of someone who is 5'6". I am 6'5", and yes, I do have knee room to spare. But broadly speaking, 2 6-footers, one behind the other, no problem. It can be done, and it can be used as a family car in that context. In fact, you do have a generous amount of headroom as well. Well, at 6'5", my hair is brushing up against the roof, but with a little bit of haircut, or if your whereabouts is 6 feet, yes, it will feel nice and accommodating. And the cabin also does feel roomy, not palatial in kind of space you're getting on, but it is still spacious, especially because of the glass area that is so nice and large. The seats themselves now, here's one advantage and disadvantage when it comes to the seats, because if you are somewhat heavy set, you will find that this cushioning is relatively more accommodating for larger frames. But the problem then is that when you go for off-roading, you don't have basically anything in terms of lateral support. So if you do come across any obstacles that are making you toss and turn side by side, you don't have the seats supporting you in that front. So what else? What is this back seat going to be like as a family car? Well, you have to accept certain facts, right? This is a purpose-built off-roader that's been given a rear seat for you to use for your family purposes, not the other way around, wherein it's a family car that happened to be turned into an off-roader. And in that context, you don't have much by way of amenities. The front seats, for example, they've got door pockets on the side, but they're only wide enough to accommodate a wallet or a phone at best, not even bottles. Similarly, at the rear, you don't have any door pocket storage whatsoever. You do have these seat back pockets. There are no rear AC vents. There's no rear armrest. The seat base itself is just about accommodating enough, but if you're on the taller side, because the seat base is not so large, even if you do have knee room and leg room to spare, you won't have much by way of under thigh support, and you will want for a little bit more on that front. And yes, the backrest is also set up sort of upright, so if you want a more relaxed driving the seating position at the back seat, yes, that is something that might irk you a little bit. But yes, I will still say this, that it's not a rear seat only meant for occasional usage or for very short adults or for kids. This can be used by 4 adults quite comfortably, if not ideally so. It is with the context of the purpose of this car that you see that this rear seat is actually pretty good. So what is that annoyance I had mentioned with the rear seat, and why is it that we have the rear seat buckled up even though no one's sitting there? Well, that's because Maruti Suzuki, as per some regulations, has included rear seatbelt reminders, which means that if you have somebody seated at the back, the alarm is supposed to go off if they aren't buckled up. The problem is this sensor doesn't come with a weight sensor, which means that even if no one is sitting in the back seat and the seatbelt is not buckled up, it will sound an alarm for about 90 seconds before going off. Why did Maruti not include a weight sensor?
6 airbags, ABS, rear parking sensors, ESP, ISOFIX, and a very average quality rear camera are part of the safety package. Auto headlamps, headlamp washers, and front fog lamps get added in the Alpha variant only. As for the crash safety rating, there isn't one yet. Euro NCAP gave the Jimny 3-door 3 on 5 stars, but in a spec that also gets autonomous braking and lane assist.
Driving the Maruti Suzuki Jimny 5-door, and before we get into anything like performance or handling or any of those other aspects, the one thing that has to stand out for me is the ride comfort. And this is actually one of the big questions that you guys had asked in our Instagram DM as to what is this car like to live with on a daily basis. And when it comes to ride comfort, especially compared to something like a Mahindra Thar, I would give this a massive edge, because on smooth roads you'll find that it's very pliant, very comfortable to drive, and it doesn't have a lot of body roll either, which is something you traditionally do associate with a lot of ladder frame SUVs. But here, even when the roads get bad or you come across a pothole or rutted surface or even a speed breaker, it clears them so nice and comfortably that initially we were sort of second guessing ourselves, wondering, is this even a ladder frame SUV? Because generally they do have to run very stiff setups. And I suspect that the reason why they've managed to achieve this better road balance with the Jimny is the suspension setup it's running, the rigid axle. But importantly, also the fact that this is a lightweight car, so they didn't have to set up the suspension too stiff to counter too much weight. Now on the handling front though, this is where you will find that this thing does behave like a typical off-road SUV, wherein the steering is not the lightest. It's not like compact SUV light, still usable in the city, but not as easy or one finger light as something like a Maruti Suzuki Brezza, for example. But when you go through corners, it's also very slow, typical of most off-roaders. So to make a turn in, even if you have the steering dialed in about quarter of the way, it doesn't give you as much turn in, which also means that when you're making U-turns, you will have to spin the steering quite a bit. And that is one place where you just get those little reminders that yes, this is still a purpose-built off-roader first. Now coming to the performance, this 1.5 litre petrol engine is something that we're familiar with, makes about 104 horsepower, 134-ish Newton meters of torque. And if those numbers don't sound impressive, that's because they aren't. But then again, this is a lightweight SUV, so it's not got a lot of pressure on it to get a good power to weight ratio. So what you'll find is that in regular driving conditions, cruising about in the city, going out on the highway, absolutely no issues. You'll have a very comfortable experience, and it's not an engine that's going to make you feel frustrated or find it underpowered. Where you will find that lack of performance though is going to be specific to a couple of conditions. Number one is driving with load, wherein obviously you will have to push the engine more, especially when it comes to overtakes. So for example, we're in Dehradun right now, a lot of uphill stretches. And when you're going up the Ghat section, you do have to plan your overtakes. And when you do make them, there's a little bit of pushing the engine that is involved. So on those sort of occasions, you do miss the option of a turbocharged petrol engine, something like you'd get with even a Mahindra Thar, because that kind of a motor not only makes more torque, but it also makes it more readily available. Lower down in the rev range, about 1750 to 2000 RPM if I'm not mistaken, whereas in this you will have to push it to that 4 to 6000 RPM range to extract the same kind of performance and more importantly the same level of ease of use. And if you ask me, would I pick the manual or the automatic? Sorry to annoy the enthusiasts, but I think I'll go with the automatic. Yes, it is a very old, outdated 4-speed automatic, but it does get the job done on most occasions and it's pretty usable as a daily driver. The manual is also alright, but where it's lacking that little edge of ease of use is on two fronts. Number one, the clutch travel is slightly on the longer side, and even the weight, it is not going to be the most convenient to use, especially if you're looking at this as maybe your first car. And secondly, the manual gear lever. The shift action on that is just not smooth enough. The Thar does feel notably easier when it comes to the shift action of the gear lever. The gear lever itself looks like something that's been directly lifted out of a gypsy. So yes, I understand old school, but that front, it feels a little bit too just plain old.
But as you'd imagine, it's off-road where everything about the Jimny starts making the most sense. As always, cameras don't do justice to the scale of off-road challenges, but through the narrow rocky trails with 4 low engaged, the Jimny eased its way ahead with the crawl ratio easily making up for an engine that otherwise doesn't offer much torque low down. Even over steep uphill tracks with 4 people on board, the Jimny scampers its way up quite happily. Interestingly, while you do get an indicator to tell you when 4 high is active, the only indication of 4 low being activated is the traction control off light on the MID. Anyway, not only does the Jimny get through rocky portions without digging into the trail too much, thanks to its light weight, the suspension controls the drama inside the cabin remarkably well. And watching it do its work, articulating, and the chassis happily flexing for the surface changes is just a different kind of entertainment. A near vertical drop had me double check the car's insurance policy first, but the Jimny cleared this test of its approach, departure, and ramp over with ease. Above all else, it's the Jimny's compact size that makes maneuvering it through tight spots an easier affair. You can confidently follow super tight markers and not worry about dinging something or curbing the wheels. All of this also factors into how amateur friendly it is. The cherry on top is that it managed all these challenges on stock, highway terrain tires and in showroom customer car spec. With the lift kits, coilover kits and knobby tires that many prospective buyers have stocked up on already, I'm curious to see the additional potential being unlocked.
It has been a very long, very tiring and nonetheless a lot of fun testing and shooting the Jimny today. And understandably, there's a lot of hype around this car, but the fact of the matter is, the Jimny is still not an SUV that was built for everyone. At its core, it is still a purpose-built off-roader, and everything else about the Jimny 5-door is built around this core tenet. With this 5-door configuration, what you're getting in the final product is, one, a very capable off-roader. Even with the 5-door getting larger dimensions, it's not much of a compromise compared to what the 3-door would offer you in terms of off-road capability. Two, it has got greater family sensibility. So while it's not ideally suited to the family, it is still practical enough to live with. And thirdly, this car offers you surprisingly good road manners for something that is an off-roader, and this is not traditionally something that you associate with purpose-built off-road SUVs, especially when it comes to ride comfort. What you're not getting with the Jimny is, one, particularly exciting performance on the road with that 1.5-liter petrol engine. It's usable, but that's about the most I can say about this engine's performance. And two, a lot of people will associate off-road SUVs with that large size and SUV bravado, and obviously that is something that you're not going to get with the Jimny, but that is also a function of its function-first approach. As for the price, I'm expecting to sit somewhere between 11 to 14.5 lakh ex-showroom, at which price I believe it would be good value. Everything else is up to you. What price would you like to see the Jimny be introduced at? And what do you think about the Jimny altogether? Was it worth the hype? Is this something you're looking to buy? And if yes, for what? For now, signing off from an extremely hot Dehradun, and hope you enjoyed this video.